John here from the Professional Nail School and Beauty Academy. Today I'm just going to look at some of the problems people have with acrylic. People often get into lots of confusion. How wet should my brush be? How big should the bead be? How many beads should I apply in an application? Well, all those things you want to try and work up with a consistent way of working, and if you do that, then you're probably going to have more success. But I'll just go through a few things. First off, your brush. Just make sure that you've got a brush with a flattened ferrule for the way that I apply acrylic, not a round ferrule on the end. Get one with a flattened ferrule, and you can see this is one from CJP, and it gives this kind of oval shape brush, which is what I prefer. So we're just looking here at how wet should the brush be. Right, obviously what I do, and of course people work different ways, but I just wet my brush, make sure that it's wet through and there's no air bubbles left in it, and I will take off just the tip of the brush like this a few times. Then I'll go into here, it's a slight angle, and I will just bring it forward, and I'll pick up on one side of the brush only. See that? I'll tip the nail down slightly, and I'll press and lift, and then I will just tap at the back and then just drag that down like this, keeping the brush really flat, and I'm more or less just using the tip of the brush like that. So I'll go on with my second bead, and I do the same every single time when I'm getting the liquid off my brush. So I then go into here again, and I'll pick up on one side of the brush, and I will just put this about 3/4 of the way towards the back like that. Just press and lift, don't smash it off. Now I'm going to go from just behind there, behind the bead, and just pull down and keeping my brush very flat. I don't want it to separate. And you can see as I'm doing it, I'm wiping in front of me like this. And sometimes I'll wipe and I'll turn the brush over and come back on with the other side. And you can see we've pretty much got an ombre there. I'm obsessed with ombres. Right, so I want to put the bead on the front, so I'm going to do exactly the same again. One side of the brush, tip the finger up slightly and just tap it onto the end and lift. Just use the tip of the brush just to pat that round, and then brush backwards with the brush really laid down flat. Any overlap on the sides, scrape it off like this. Okay, so before I go back in my monomer, always make sure you've got no acrylic on your brush, but don't scrub your brush. Just do this like this, because you're trying to keep the brush in that nice shape all the time. So I'm just going to go back on now, and I can see it probably just wants a little bit more in that center piece there. So I'm just going to pick up some acrylic and place it about here, and then I'm just going to brush that out, keeping the brush nice and flat, brushing from behind the bead. Now people say, well, how many beads should I do it in? Well, it doesn't really matter. You do it in as many beads as you need to. Obviously, as you get more experience, you may find a way of doing it in less beads. But the main thing, what you're trying to do is get a perfect finish, which is just completely smooth, and the colour saturation, if you're using a colour, is the same all the way through the nail. So there may be instances where you have to just add a little bit there and just add to your colour saturation. Now when I'm doing all over colours like this one is, I will always encapsulate. So I'm going to put a bead there, tap that round, and then drag down the nail. And of course, if I'd put glitter on, I would, on the tip say, I would have to make sure I encapsulate that as well. And at this point, you can build up your arch point if you want there, and you can use polymerization. What that is where it starts to set slightly, and then you can, when you drag down, it will leave it slightly thicker in that area. So polymerization is quite useful. Basically, it's a posh word for the acrylic setting. So I'm just going to put a bit on the end here, tap, 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 and then just brush that backwards into the nail. And there we have our nail, which is like perfect, I think. Pretty good. There we go. So when you're actually putting your, after you've put your bead onto the actual thing, the tip or the nail, what's important is that one side of the brush, tip it down. Whenever you're working near the cuticle, tip it down. Once you put your bead on, just do this with your brush, and basically it'll bring the brush into shape, so you get a nice flat brush to work with. I think I'm repeating myself a bit here, but never mind. Just tap, lift, and then wipe your brush. So you end up with a flat brush, and then when you brush from behind the acrylic bead. Just like that. And then it's up to you how many beads you put on. You could just pick up a smaller bead now. I think I'm going to pick up a smaller bead and place it about there. Dry my brush, and then I'm just going to pull down like this. Let me do a bit of that. Just be very, very gentle with your brush. So I think I might make this one into an ombre. And you probably noticed I haven't used any white at all. So I've got nail tip down, and I'm just going to just pull that down like that. And using the natural colour of the tip, I've made an ombre. So because there's no product on the front now, I will have to just add some clear, obviously. I may have put a bit of glitter on there as well. So I'm just going to put some clear onto the front. Dry your brush every time. Just tap, 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 and then just brush backwards into the nail. Any of that overhang, scrape it off like that. Now I might want to build up my arch a little bit. So what I'll do, I'll just put a blob here. Dry your brush. Brush from behind the acrylic and just gently bring that down. I use that posh word again, polymerize, because it started to set slightly because I left it a few seconds, and when that happens, it just means that it'll leave it thicker in that area. I'll just put a little bit at the back here. Tap, 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 point the finger down, and then just brush that out. Now, of course, when you're doing ombres, you do have to encapsulate every time, because otherwise, as you file away afterwards, you'd file away the graduation. So you can see there's an ombre. Very simple way of doing it. I didn't use any white whatsoever. I just faded that pink into that natural colour tip. as I said, when I'm brushing off, you must keep your brush flat, and I wipe as I come off like this in this action. Now if you have your brush too high an angle, what will happen is that as you brush, your brush will bend and then it will split. So you don't want that to happen. You want to keep your brush in one piece. And by wiping it at the front here, what it does, it pulls your brush back into a shape that you want it to be next time you go on. And what I do sometimes, as I come off and wipe, I will turn the brush over and come back on with my second stroke. Turn the brush over, come back on my second stroke. Also, when I'm doing the sides, I will rotate my client's finger so I can see the sides. And I'll rotate this way so I can see the sides. Obviously, you need to clear out any overlapping acrylic that may have run down into the side walls, either with your nails like this, with the edge of your brush, or with an orange stick. So I always do the same every time, exactly the same, off the tip of the brush. Now what you don't want to do is when you go into your powder, don't dip it in and then you end up with acrylic on both sides of the brush. Because when you release, you put that onto the nail, one, it won't release properly, and the second thing is that you will get a little build-up of acrylic on the other side of the brush. And as you keep working, you put an acrylic back into here, you maybe, also, and then this starts getting all thick, or maybe it starts to dry on the other side of the brush, and you end up with a brush that as you're using it, gets harder and harder, and eventually you just can't use it. So keep your beads to one side of the brush. Now an important thing is when you're putting the bead onto the nail, is what you need to do is to just press lightly and lift. You see what I did? Press, lift. What you don't want to be doing is actually smashing the acrylic off the brush, because then you'll just ruin the bead that you've just placed on there. So for instance, let's wreck this one. So if I go pick up my bead, one side of the brush, you see that? Don't do this, because you basically wrecked the bead that you were actually putting on. You've just smashed it on, and you don't want to be doing that. My goodness, there's another ambulance coming up. So what you have to do, pick your bead up, one side of the brush, press lightly and lift like that, like that. Now when you brush your bead out, brush from behind the bead. Don't brush on the bead, brush from behind, and that way you will get a nice smooth finish, because basically it will just smooth the back of the bead as well. And you can see there, we've almost done an ombre there, haven't we? And then I would just put clear all over that, and then that would be my ombre. So pick up again, one side of the brush, so it's not setting on the other side. And I always tip the finger up when I'm putting the one on the end. So I'll just press, lift. See what I did? Press, lift. And with the very tip of the brush, just pat that out there. And then keep the brush laid down flat. and brush backwards. Now you might get a little bit of hangover, so I scrape the edge like that, and you see it comes off on the brush. Then you must make sure you remove that off the brush. And then normally I would just then encapsulate that with clear. I tend to always encapsulate. It's just something that I've always done. So I'm just increasing the density of the colour a little bit here, just making sure that it is the same colour all over. Just make sure that you just press and lift. Tap, tap, tap. What you must never do is stab at your acrylic. This is what we call stabbing. This, right? Because what it'll do, it'll just make you have all lumpy nails. Now, as you can see, that nail is ultra smooth, and that's what you're trying to achieve, because you want to do as little filing as possible after this is set and when in your finishing. So if you get it on smooth, you'll have to do very little filing. And like I just said before, if you want to add a bit of clear over the top, which is what I tend to do, I will just add it on and then just drag it out like this. Very easy to do. Nothing difficult about doing nails. Now the other thing which is of interest is that if this gets a bit sticky here, because as I'm coming off and wiping my brush, what you need to do is turn over the paper, go to or get a new piece of paper, because every time you wipe your brush here on a sticky layer, you're adding partly dried acrylic to your brush. And what happens then, it gradually starts to, your brush starts to get impossible to use. So what you need to do every now and again is just refresh your brush. So every now and again, I will just get my acrylic, pure acetone, and just clean my brush out like this, through the acetone, just so that it is refreshed. Just pull it out a bit, maybe just take a bit of moisture out of it, and then go back into my monomer. Any trace elements of the acetone won't hurt the monomer. At the end of the session of doing nails, I want to make sure that this brush is ready for my next client. So I just get some acetone, pure acetone, give the brush a swill out in that, and then I will use a brush cleaner like this one here, and I will just clean my brush out in this. I never clean my brush out in monomer that I've been using, because you find that sometimes you've got some bits of acrylic in that, dissolved in that, and then you'll come back to your brush and your brush will be set hard. So I always clean it out in acetone and brush cleaner. Now, there are a lot of people who say that, you know, you should never clean your brush in acetone, but I've been doing it like this for 20 years and I've never had a problem. So I've always done it. Right, so once you've got your brush clean, just hang it up somewhere or lay it down flat, but the bristles must not be in a situation where they're going to dry curved up. So I tend to hang mine up in a holder like that. If your brush has got really dried acrylic in, then you'll need to use something like this, and you'll need to soak your brush So you just pop that into there, into the pure acetone, and just leave it soaking with the bristles covered for about 20 minutes, and then usually you can then get the acrylic out. Never actually pull the acrylic out, because you'll just cause damage to the brush. If you look after your brush should last you years and years and years. So I just pull it out into the shape that I want it to be next time, very gently, like that. I never use the caps that you get with these brushes, because I want my brush to educate my brush to be in this flat shape. If I do this, when I come to use it next time, it'll be in this flat shape. Whereas if I pull it to a point to get the cap on, it'll be in a point. I don't want that, I want this. So that's why I never use the caps, because if I try to use the cap on it in this shape, it would catch little hairs at the side. I'd come back to my brush, I'd take the cap off, and I'd have hairs sticking out all over the place. So that's why I never use the caps that come with the brushes. So I hope all that was useful today, and if you've got any things you'd like me to go through, problems you're having, just put a message below, and I'll try and see if I can come up with some sort of tutorial on that. So it's John here from the Professional Nail School and Beauty Academy, thenailschool.co.uk, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.